today, it's worth underlining that the Queen has been on the world stage. She's been a prominent figure on the world stage, just in terms of statesmanship, just in terms of her unique position as a constitutional monarch and what she represents. And that is, again, something that we could reflect on today, which is the fact that there will be millions and millions of people around the world who've never been to the United Kingdom, who will be interested and exercised by what's happening to the Queen and the family today.
That's right. She is a global figure, as one of our guests earlier said. Now, that expresses itself most particularly through the Commonwealth, this coalition of nations, and the subject which is very close to her heart, and in which she has exercised a real role as head of the Commonwealth. That did give her a sort of diplomatic platform that, given the political constraints as Queen of the United Kingdom, she didn't have. But I think the other thing that we consider is what she has stood for, what she has represented. She has stood for decency and tolerance, and she's been dutiful and steadfast and all those other things. And so many other heads of state, I think, have recognised those qualities in her, and they have admired them, and they have admired the way she has conducted herself over 70 years with putting barely a foot wrong. And I think, you know, at international meetings, many of these foreign heads of state, they come, and the first thing they want to do is meet the Queen, because she's become such a historical figure, a figure, you know, who does represent so much that is decent and right.
Different perspective on the image we saw just a few moments ago, Nick, and this is the Duke of Cambridge actually driving the vehicle, where we saw the Duke of York there in the passenger seat, and the Earl of Wessex in the back. But that's William driving them, so just gives you another little perspective on the journey from Aberdeen to Balmoral, and you can imagine that that was a fairly intense journey, really.
So these are really private family moments, aren't there? So one imagines, we can't see for certain, that the four people in that vehicle, I'm assuming that this is the Duke of York that we can see closest to us, as you say, the Duke of Cambridge, and then in the back, the Wessex, the Essexes, the Earl and Countess of Wessex. So no protection officers, no officials, just the four members of the family driving together, reflecting, one must imagine, together on whatever the situation is.
And there we see the four of them.
Yes.
It's a clearer picture there, isn't it? So William, and then Prince Andrew, and then Prince Edward, and then it's the Countess of Wessex there in the other seat in the back, isn't it?
Underlining that this is, above all for them, a family moment. And they will have wanted, I'm sure, to have been just alone amongst themselves in the family group, the four of them. And my goodness, okay, we are aware of the difficulties that have surrounded the Duke of York. And Prince William has been quite vociferous in his views on that, and has taken quite a leading part in ensuring that the Duke of York has withdrawn from public life. But again, I think this is not the moment for those issues.
No. Well, by now, they'll be in Balmoral Castle, and as you were saying, Nick, one imagines that they will by now have had a full briefing from the medical team there, that they will be aware of the situation. One imagines that they would be possibly at the bedside, where the Queen is being treated, and she's in a comfortable state, we were told earlier on. So we're trying to imagine the scene where, you know, the closest members of the family are with Her Majesty.
And they will be there with Prince Charles, who is the senior member of the royal family, other than the Queen, of course, but who in this situation with the Queen, if we say incapacitated, I mean simply that she is sufficiently unwell for doctors to be concerned and for her to be, as we keep saying, comfortable at Balmoral. But I think that this is a situation in which Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, will be, if not taking charge, then sort of taking the lead in the family's consultation amongst themselves. And there will be a number of things that they will need to think about, because if the Queen is, to some extent, incapacitated or less able than she has been to fulfill the role of head of state, that has implications, particularly obviously for Charles and for the councillors of state, one of whom is still Prince Andrew.
Yes.
But anyway, that's again another issue. But there are, aside from the family issues, the concern and so on, there are other issues that they and their officials will be just considering.
Well, we mentioned there the fact that, of course, the medical team will be briefing the royal family members who've just arrived. So why don't we have a quick word again with our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. And Fergus, there will be people watching. Some of them will know quite a bit about the medical world, others not. Wondering what it means that, for example, the Queen is being kept comfortable and as comfortable as possible at Balmoral. There's no mention of new treatment or further treatment or a different kind of intervention, let's say at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, which is the closest hospital, and people will read things into that. What guidance would you give?
I think it's worth saying, Hugh, that the Queen has her own team of medics. The royal household has its own team, led by the physician to the Queen, Professor Sir Hugh Thomas. That's a role, a physician to the monarch, that stretches back at least to Henry VIII. And he is also head of the medical household. That's a title that was created back in 1973. Now, that statement that we have had, that brief statement, unprecedented, that the Queen's doctors were concerned for Her Majesty's health, but that she was comfortable, is all really that we have to go on, but unprecedented because it's not the sort of statement that we've ever been given before. Because, of course, as you and Nick have been saying, and other commentators and guests have been saying, we have been used to, all of us, been brought up and lived our lives with the Queen as head of state. 15 prime ministers have served under her. The first one, Winston Churchill, born back in 1874. The last to be appointed this week, Liz Truss, born 101 years later. And it is that continuity, and she has been in such robust good health for most of her life. So it is that decline that we have seen last year. Last October, she began using a walking stick in public. We've had these mobility issues. And then, although she did look very engaged in the photos with Liz Truss earlier this week, she did look frail and, as Nick said earlier, did seem to have lost quite a lot of weight.
Yes, indeed. There was a lot of focusing on the image itself, Fergus. When we talk about the kind of care that the Queen is getting, obviously an extremely high standard of care with some of the top experts in the country, indeed in some cases in the world, led by Sir Hugh Thomas, there'll be clearly a view on whether it's a normal process to allow the Queen to stay at home, in effect, in Balmoral, rather than look for maybe a more specialist unit elsewhere. Are people wrong to read things into that, or do you think that's perfectly understandable?
I think it's perfectly understandable, and in one sense, it's no different from what you would have with any 96-year-old who has fallen ill and is comfortable at home and able to be kept comfortable. If there was any treatment in a specialist unit that her medical team and her family would deem could help the Queen, as with any other patient, I'm sure that treatment would be given. But it's been decided that she's comfortable. Her family are gathered around her at what is a very difficult time, and we obviously await updates. We know no more officially or unofficially than we've been told in that statement.
Fergus, many thanks again for helping us out with that and some of the questions about the kind of care that the Queen is getting. Buckingham Palace there for you in all its splendour, with the internal quadrangle and then the forecourt, and then the gardens to the side and to the back. It's a very familiar sight, and the crowds there gathering, starting to gather anyway, despite some of the weather problems. And of course they're facing the famous balcony right in the centre of the facade, the balcony where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions since she first appeared as a girl with her parents back in the 1930s, late 30s, early 40s indeed. And of course the very famous images of the royal family on that balcony at the end of the Second World War with her father, the King George VI, really hugely popular monarch by that point, having really given leadership with his wife, the Queen Mother, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, throughout those wartime years. So there are a lot of memories there for the Queen herself, notwithstanding, of course, the fact that she's been on the balcony as monarch herself for the past 70 years or so, and those great occasions for the Golden Jubilee and the Platinum Jubilee, and back to 1977, the Diamond Jubilee, where we've seen millions of people crowding into this space at the end of the Mall and around the memorial to greet members of the royal family. So it's very much the symbol of royalty in London. There are lots of symbols of royalty in London, but Buckingham Palace, surely, with its balcony and its very famous facade, and very often, of course, with the sovereign standard flying when the Queen is in residence. It is the place that millions of tourists come to every year to get their taste of the royal presence in the United Kingdom. Well, today the Queen is not in residence here. She's in residence in Balmoral, her Scottish estate in Aberdeenshire, and she's been there since June, and it's a place she loves very much. Sadly today we are reporting on the fact that her health is causing very significant concerns for the medical team, and that is the reason that we've seen very close members of the royal family, including the Queen's children, Charles and Anne and Andrew and Edward, making their way to Balmoral. They are there as we speak, as are some other members of the royal family, and they are probably being briefed, or maybe have been briefed by now, by the medical team on the Queen's condition, which suddenly overnight and into the morning started to cause far more concerns. We remember, of course, that just a couple of days ago, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, was driven in through these gates and met the Queen and was granted an audience where she was invited to form a government. And the Queen at that point, although looking frail, was smiling and clearly very engaged in the process. And then yesterday, as part of the process of a new government, there was meant to be a meeting of the Privy Council. That's the senior politicians who advise the Queen in certain capacities, and the Queen was meant to hold that meeting virtually, if you like, in terms of video messaging, and that was felt to be unwise. The doctors advised the Queen not to engage in that online Privy Council meeting, and she was advised to rest. Now, most people who've been following royal events, and certainly my colleague Nicholas Witchell here and others, would say, well, that was a significant change of plan, not to have that Privy Council meeting, albeit online. And then by this morning, of course, the very worrying news that doctors were concerned about the Queen's health. So that treatment going on, it's happening at Balmoral. It's a very different place, isn't it, to the one on the right-hand side of the screen now, where we see the Queen leading the celebrations from that famous balcony of Buckingham Palace at the Jubilee, with millions of people crowded into this part of central London, all the way down from Admiralty Arch, all the way down the Mall, through the parks, the royal parks, to Buckingham Palace itself. A very happy day. And of course with the Royal Marines and all the other wonderful military musicians in attendance, and the bands of the Household Division as well, who've been entertaining the royal family and the crowds for many, many years. Their stunning and sparkling military drill and their exceptional musicianship. The Queen's been a great supporter and a great ally of the armed forces over many years, and she is deeply respected and very, very well regarded and loved indeed by them, by all branches of the armed forces, as she is by millions of people around the country. So it's a nice image for us to enjoy on the right hand side, just happier times, if you like, than on the left hand side, that rather well, a bit of a grey depressing sight, a bit of a wet, low-key sight, if you like, a rather depressing sight at Balmoral, the wet roads leading into the estate itself. And we know, of course, what lies beyond the road. We know what lies at the end of that path. It is the castle, and it is the Queen being kept comfortable, being monitored 24/7 by an expert medical team. And all we can do is clearly wish the Queen well. We do that automatically and sincerely, but we are waiting too, I think it's fair to say, for further news from the medical team at Buckingham Palace and at Balmoral about the Queen's condition. And Nicholas Witchell is with me, our royal correspondent, who of course has been talking to us all afternoon about the events of this day. And this is the time of day, Nick, when lots of people will be maybe returning from work, they'll be joining us, they'll be aware of the reports, but they won't have seen lots of it. And I think that we're in a position where we're waiting, and we're right to be waiting without any rush and without any haste at all, waiting for the next update, if you like, now that we know the royal family has gathered there.
Yes, and of course Buckingham Palace has not been in the habit of giving updates, but I think on this occasion there will have to be something, given the level of concern that there is not just here but around the world. And we've seen the other members of the royal family arriving at Balmoral. That in itself is an indication, I think, of just how serious the situation is. So the mood, I think, is fairly described as sombre. The concern is considerable. So many politicians have talked about profound concern, and one must imagine that the Prime Minister and others are aware, have been appraised on Privy Council terms with whatever is the absolute situation. So we await any further news from Buckingham Palace, though I have to say that at the moment there is no indication that there is any further statement to be made. Looking, you made much of the images of the Queen on the balcony during the Jubilee celebrations remarkable, really, just 3 months ago. And when she appeared in that bright green coat, that was on the final day of the Jubilee celebrations on that Sunday. And it had been thought that perhaps she wouldn't make the journey from Windsor, but I think the Prince of Wales encouraged her to do so, and of course she did. And of course the crowds were absolutely delighted to see her. And I think she was terribly touched when they sang the national anthem. And yes, there was, I think, a sense that, something is drawing gradually to a close here. And I think that everybody was very touched on that occasion. That balcony that actually she first appeared on in 1927, when she was 1 year old. She was brought and shown to the crowd by her proud parents, the Duke of York, as he was then, her father and mother. So yes, remarkable really, and that is what monarchy is all about, the continuity, the span of years.
Yes.
The balcony, everything changes but nothing changes. And that is why it is this source of reassurance, which so many people, so many millions of people find very comforting. So we must just continue to hope for the best, that there is some encouraging news, but at the same time, I think, given all the circumstances, we have to accept that, we just have to wait and see.
Yes, we do. Indeed, Nick, thank you. Let's go from Balmoral then to Downing Street. Let's join Chris Mason, our political editor, who's joining us from there. Chris, do you have any update for us on what Downing Street's understanding of events is?
What I can tell you, Hugh, is that the Prime Minister is working as normal behind me in Downing Street. There are no plans for her to return to Scotland, to Balmoral. Of course, as we've been reflecting, she was there just a couple of days ago to become Prime Minister in that last public moment where we saw the Queen as the Prime Minister before Liz Truss. Boris Johnson had resigned shortly followed by Liz Truss. We did hear from the Prime Minister at lunchtime shortly after the statement from Buckingham Palace in which Liz Truss said the whole country will be deeply concerned by the news from Buckingham Palace, and adding my thoughts and those of people across our United Kingdom are with Her Majesty the Queen and her family at this time. And here at Westminster, like I suspect in every corner of the UK, and indeed in many places around the world, a profound...
Chris, I apologise. I hate interrupting you, but I'm afraid we've got a dreadful problem on the mic. I suppose it's the elements interfering. It's the rain getting into cables and all kinds of things. So if we clear that up, Chris, I'll be back with you as soon as we can. Chris Mason there, our political editor. By the way, the US President Joe Biden has told Prime Minister Liz Truss that he and his wife Jill are thinking of the Queen amid deep concerns over the monarch's health. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said this. His, that's to say, the President and the First Lady's thoughts are solidly and squarely with the Queen today and with her family. The President has been briefed this morning and will be updated throughout the day concerning news out of the United Kingdom. So that's President Biden. I suppose, Nick, we can expect, we've had quite a bit already, but from the person who's the other side of the special relationship, you'd expect an expression of sincere concern. And given all the visits that the Queen has made to the States, and indeed how many state visits for presidents as she hosted in Downing Street over the years, well, that's one expression of concern that you would expect straight away.
Yep, and I think once again, it is quite normal for US presidents to be very keen to meet the Queen. They met at the G7 summit down in Cornwall, however many months ago that was. And of course, the Queen has met every US president, bar one. She never met Lyndon Johnson, but I think Biden is the 14th US president. We're on to the 15th Prime Minister, 14th president, and I think there have been 6 or is it 7 popes that she's met, and which just again gives you a flavour of this remarkable life that she has led, meeting so many significant figures in world history, beginning just after the war as a young princess when her father was ailing and she was having to step in and assist him as a councillor of state. So she has met just about anybody who is anybody, and yet she has never shared to the world any of her thoughts or appraisals of any of them. Yeah. She has kept it all within either herself or within her family, and she has understood the fundamentals of the position that she has occupied for these 70 years, that she must be an uncontroversial figure, and she has absolutely understood the principles of a constitutional monarch. She learnt them really from her father, and she has continued in the style of her father, rather understated. And it was for that reason, of course, that she found the Duke of Edinburgh such a useful ally, because there was the difference in personality, difference in approach. And I think she owed so much to him, as we sensed in some of the things that she has said about him since his death.
It's interesting, owing, yes, of course, to Philip, but one senses as well that because of the abdication in 36, and then the fact that the course of her life changed, that her father really did take on the role of a very diligent tutor. And as I said earlier, Nick, I read somewhere when one of the royal household commented and said, look, in many ways you have to look at the reign of Elizabeth II as a continuation of the reign of George VI. And when you think about it in those terms, it makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. In style, they are so similar. And the Queen revered and loved her father deeply. She knew what a struggle it was for George VI to be the monarch during the difficult times of the Second World War. It was a huge strain. He was helped through it, of course, by the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, but also by his elder and I'm sure younger daughter, but they were a very close unit. And there is no doubt that the Queen learnt an awful lot from her father, rather in the same way as she has attempted to pass what she has learnt, not perhaps so much to Prince Charles, but to Prince William. And I think the Queen has taken a great deal of time to, as it were, tutor and pass on her wisdom and her approach and the principles that have governed her approach to monarchy to Prince William. And I think I interviewed him some years ago, and I asked him, whose template do you tend to follow? Is that the one of your father or the one of your grandmother? And rather to my surprise, he answered and said, well, I think my grandmother has got it absolutely right. And, in many ways, Prince William once said about being monarch, it's about setting an example, doing one's duty. It's about using your position for the good. It's about serving the country. Now, those, goodness me, those are the principles that encapsulate the approach that Queen Elizabeth has brought to the monarchy, to the British monarchy.
Nick, thank you. We're going to just bring in a guest, to the royal biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, it's good to have you with us, and we're grateful for your expert perspective on this as well today. As we follow the reports, and clearly we're reflecting on the deep concern that people have at this point, and the family have gathered there in Balmoral. What are your reflections at this stage?
Well, I think I feel very much what everybody is feeling. Obviously, this is a very poignant moment, and none of us quite know what's going to happen, but because the entire family, well, the entire nucleus of the family are gathered at Balmoral, and the fact that the Queen hasn't been sent to hospital speaks volumes. They obviously just want to keep her comfortable, have her family around her, and we just have to literally wait for news, whether it be good or bad. There's nothing more we can do. That is the situation, and it's very sad, especially as as you've said many times this afternoon, as we saw the Queen with Liz Truss only 48 hours ago, 2 days ago on Tuesday, and she looked so happy and in good spirits. I know she looked frail, but if you have mobility problems, you're going to have muscle loss, and so she's going to look frail. But it was really wonderful to see her, and it sort of gave us all hope. Oh, there she will, she'll be carrying on. But whatever has happened between now and then, we don't know. But all we can do is just hope very much for the best.
Indeed. I know that everyone watching will be sharing that, Ingrid, certainly. It's been a remarkable year, hasn't it, really, because we've reported several times on the issues that have surrounded the Queen's health, the fact that she's not been able to undertake some engagements. And yet, when we think back to the Jubilee, which at one point we were very concerned about in terms of the Queen's ability to be present, we had 2 balcony appearances, we had a great sense of fun and celebration around the birthday parade to open events. The year has been one of some extremes, really, hasn't it? And as you say, it is just a matter of 48 hours ago since the Queen was obviously determined to fulfil her constitutional duty and invite Liz Truss to form a government. So it speaks volumes, really, about Her Majesty's commitment to the job.
It certainly does, and she hates letting people down, and she's always really wanted to get on with the job. So I think she's had a mentally probably quite a hard time. But I think this all started in October 21, when she was meant to be going to Ireland. And suddenly, the journalists and everyone were waiting for her, and suddenly she had to cancel. That was the beginning of her mobility problems. And I think it must have been difficult for her to have to say, well, take doctor's orders, which she always does, saying, I can't do this. And so that has been a recurring theme of her life ever since then. And I think, wonderful though she is and cheerful though she is, I think it must have been very difficult for her and very frustrating to feel that she's unable to carry out the duties which she's carried out all her life, which is another reason, I think, why Buckingham Palace have delayed it till the sort of 99th hour always to let us know whether or not the Queen is able to do certain things. I think it's because she was so determined to try and do them, but in the end couldn't. So it's been a difficult time for her.
Well, we'd like to think that we'll get a good progress report, Ingrid, but we must wait and see. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ingrid Seward there, of Editor-in-Chief of Majesty magazine. If you're just joining us here on BBC News, this is our extended coverage today, following that bulletin from the Queen's medical team at lunchtime that her doctors are now very concerned about the state of her health. She's at Balmoral, her estate in Aberdeenshire. That is where she's being cared for. She's said to be in a comfortable condition. The doctors are there with her. She's having full 24/7 medical supervision, and in the last couple of hours the family has been gathering, and we've seen the children turning up, the rest of them, because Prince Charles was there already, and Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and now they've been joined by the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, and indeed by the Duke of Cambridge, her grandson, who's also arrived in the last hour or so. They landed at Aberdeen Airport about an hour and a half ago. So they're all there, and the Queen, who's been engaged in lots of duties in recent months and has been showing great spirit and great strength and a determination to really fulfill all those items in the diary. Well, today we had the news that she's not able to do that now. She's in a position where her health is causing a lot more concern. She's been made to feel comfortable, we're told. There's no mention of any hospital treatment or any other intervention elsewhere. All the care is being done at Balmoral. So following that statement, which was at 12:30 today, which is over 5 hours ago, there's been no word. All we've seen is the gathering of the close family members at Balmoral Castle itself. We are waiting to see if there'll be another statement. We don't know. But there may be a statement, and that is why we're staying on air as we approach 6 o'clock. And my colleague Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is keeping a very, very close eye on these events, as you would imagine. And Nick, I've just summarised there where we are right now, but there'll be lots of people watching, wondering if it is realistic to expect some kind of statement now that the children have gathered, and maybe that they've had some kind of briefing from the doctors. So that's not an unreasonable thing to ask.
Well, I would have thought that that is absolutely what will need to happen. I think Buckingham Palace will have to say something, because there is such widespread and deep concern now, and the family has arrived at Balmoral, as you say, and therefore it would be logical for them to issue something, whether it is just a bulletin in terms of briefing us as to the state of her health, whether there has been an improvement, or whatever is the situation, because I think that as we approach the early evening now, it will be necessary for Buckingham Palace to say something. But I stress that I have not seen any indication that that is the case. That is just us sort of thinking that it would be logical and sensible and necessary.
Well, necessary because, of course, you know, there's no way to kind of overstate this. The affection for the Queen, the respect for the Queen, people's sense of loyalty to the Queen is such that it will be exercising people's minds.
Well, yes. You know, in all of our minds is the unimaginable almost, isn't it, really? And when that moment comes, and we have no reason to suppose that it is imminent, but people will find it an almost seismic moment, a seismic scale of shock when that moment comes. And I'm not in any way suggesting that it is about to come, but we are, let's be just candid about it. We've seen the facts as they have emerged today. We have seen the family gathering. They haven't rushed up to Balmoral without very good reason, and one must suppose that whatever it is that they have now been briefed about, Buckingham Palace will feel the need to share that with the rest of the nation and indeed the Commonwealth at some point this evening.
One imagines, because as you said earlier, Nick, we're talking about a family. It's the royal family, and we're dealing here with Her Majesty the Queen. But it's family, and it's a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother whose health we are talking about. And I imagine that they have gathered with her to offer comfort.
Yep, one must assume that. And it is only I can't do it in my head, 20 months, is it, or since the Duke of Edinburgh's death,
Yes.
Rather less than that.
Yes.
So, you know, this is a family which has suffered one death quite recently, and which is now having to deal with the illness and the declining health, as we understand it at the moment, of, as you say, their mother or their grandmother. It is perfectly possible that she will recover from this, or not perhaps recover, but that she will get over whatever issue it is that has caused the doctors to speak in the way that they have. So we must again stress that we don't know what the true situation is. We are merely anticipating and expecting that the palace will feel it necessary to say something. But as you say, Hugh, at the heart of this is a family which is providing comfort to the Queen, and one must hope that that is the situation that is taking place within Balmoral Castle at the moment.
Nick, thank you. Well, the time is a minute past 6 o'clock, and if you're joining us here on BBC News, we are reporting the latest on the state of the Queen's health, because Her Majesty is under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle after doctors became concerned for her health. A statement from Buckingham Palace released earlier this afternoon said that the Queen, who's 96, was placed under supervision after further evaluation, they said, but they then went on to say she remains comfortable. Now, the BBC understands that all 4 of the Queen's children are now at the royal estate in Aberdeenshire. 4 senior royals arrived at Balmoral in the past hour. The Land Rover being driven by the Duke of Cambridge. Alongside him was Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and then the Earl and Countess of Wessex also with them. We are told that Prince Harry is also on his way, but he wasn't travelling with this party, and he's not travelling either with his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She's not travelling to Balmoral. There's been lots of reaction, as you'd imagine, lots of expressions of alarm during the day. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying that the whole country would be deeply concerned by the news, and she said that her thoughts and those of everyone in the UK were currently with Her Majesty and with members of the royal family. Let's just remind ourselves, just 2 days ago, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was officially asked by the Queen to form a government. Liz Truss became the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign when she visited the Queen there at Balmoral. So that is a summary of where we stand right now at 3 minutes past 6, and our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me, and Nick and I are keeping a very close eye on all the developments, watching the comings and goings there at Balmoral too. What would you say to viewers at this point, Nick?
I would say that I think once again, in the absence of any hard facts, that the images, I think, are now starting to tell the story. I was looking closely at that picture that we just showed of the Wessexes in the back of that vehicle. It's the first time we've seen the close-up of Prince Edward, or the Earl of Wessex, and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I thought they looked very sombre. I thought in particular she looks very sombre.
Yeah.
I think people, every individual must look at that photograph and draw their own conclusions. I'm not going to assist anybody in attempting to draw any conclusion, but I think she looks, sombre.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
I think, they're arriving there at the gates of Balmoral Castle after dashing up from London, from their home at Bagshot, having been presumably summoned at some point this morning and briefed about whatever it is that has occurred at Balmoral Castle, and the family has come together and they have gone on a RAF plane and they have flown straight to Aberdeen and then straight out to Balmoral. This against the background of the Queen's doctors having become concerned about her health. So that is the situation. We have heard the statements from senior politicians who will have been briefed on Privy Council terms. Current and previous Prime Ministers will know what the situation is, and I think again we just read into their statements a general sense of profound concern.
Well, that statement, Nick, of course, came from Buckingham Palace, and these are the images of the palace where there have been some crowds gathering during the course of the afternoon, because of course the news has been getting around and people have been at the railings there, just waiting to see if there's any announcement, waiting to see if there's any news of the Queen's health. And some of those, of course, will be visitors to London. Others will be people who live in London or indeed are visiting London from other parts of the UK and beyond. How unusual, Nick, was the statement that was released by Buckingham Palace earlier today?
Extremely. They have made a point of not saying anything. As we've been discussing this afternoon, they insist that the Queen is entitled to patient confidentiality. They will not engage in a commentary about her health. So after telling us back in October, on October the 20th, that she was cancelling that visit to Northern Ireland and she had been advised by her doctors to rest, their statements have been few and far between. We have had briefings, if one can call them that the episodic mobility issues have from time to time reared their head and have prevented her from attending some of these major state events, the state opening of Parliament and so on and so forth. But they have not gone beyond that. They have not addressed the suspicion, and it's been a pretty widespread suspicion, that there has been some underlying condition in addition to the mobility problem. So for them to come out, having said last night that she was unable to chair the virtual Privy Council meeting, that it was necessary and that she was tired after the events with the incoming Prime Minister, that she was needing to rest last night, then this morning to hear the statement from Buckingham Palace. Yes, I think we can all quite reasonably and justifiably say that clearly something has happened that is giving rise to all of this concern.
With that, let's go to Downing Street then and talk to our political editor, Chris Mason. And Chris, we've already seen the image of the Queen smiling just 2 days ago, looking frail but smiling as she greeted Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. What's going on in Downing Street today? The Prime Minister working there and obviously being fully informed about events at Balmoral.
That's right, Hugh, yeah. So Liz Truss is working from Downing Street this evening. There are no plans for her to travel to Scotland, to Balmoral. As we've been reporting in the last few hours, several members of the wider royal family have been making that journey. It is, of course, as you say, just a couple of days ago that Liz Truss was there and was greeted by the Queen, had that audience with the Queen in which she was invited to form a government and to become Prime Minister just a matter of moments before the Queen had had a final audience as Prime Minister with Boris Johnson, in which he tendered his resignation. And it was that reminder of the key role that the Queen plays right at the heart of the British political system, detached from democracy and yet somehow overseeing it and performing these central roles of state when governments come and governments go. And that announcement last night that she wasn't able to take part in that virtual meeting of the Privy Council, that's a gathering of senior ministers who meet in her presence regularly, an indication of her frailty. And in the last few months there have been those signs, haven't there, of her increasing age. So, for instance, the audiences that Prime Ministers have with the Queen and hugely cherish, when you read the memoirs of Prime Ministers, they hugely cherish that opportunity they have, that discreet opportunity for a chat in private with the Queen, weighted and freighted as she is with all of the experience that she has meeting heads of state and government over decade after decade after decade. Traditionally, and for many years, they would happen in person at Buckingham Palace. In recent years, not least because of the pandemic, but continuing after that as well, those audiences happening remotely, again to account for those episodic mobility problems as reported by the Palace in recent months and years, and an acknowledgement of her increasing frailty and age. And even in the last 48 hours, a reminder here at Westminster of the role of the Queen in the formation of a government. Not just that moment that we so widely reported the other day, and Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, but also the appointment of ministers. When ministers are formally appointed, they are done so formally by the Queen. They are ministers of the Crown. So plenty here at Westminster, reflecting very profoundly and reflecting that profound concern that exists around the country and in many places around the world about the Queen's health this evening, so conscious as they are of that bind that exists constitutionally between Parliament, government and the royal household, the monarch personified for so long by the Queen.
Indeed, Chris, and it is one of those moments, and let's hope we get good news from Balmoral, but it's one of those moments when people do reflect on the kind of constitutional arrangement that exists and which the Queen has made work. She's really helped to oil the wheels of that constitutional arrangement, which lots of constitutional experts say, is not a normal arrangement. It's not an arrangement which on paper should be working. But of course, this notion of the Crown in Parliament as the constitutional monarchy is framed is one that today we reflect on, because of course there is this axis, the axis of importance and continuity, which stretches from the palace to Parliament and to the executive itself.
Yes, and we see this, don't we, when there are those moments, the state opening of Parliament, colloquially described as the Queen's speech, where the Queen comes along. She wasn't able to attend, of course, just a few months ago, but comes along to Parliament and sits there delivering out loud the government's words, saying what the government is planning to do in its legislative programme in the months and years ahead. And there's a particular moment in that ceremony, you may recall this, where the door is slammed in the face of an official called Black Rod, acknowledging the independence of the democratic House of Commons in that constitutional arrangement where the Queen, the head of state, sits at the top of it, Parliament below it. That point about the head of state, a striking one as well, Hugh. I've travelled recently to the G7 summit in Bavaria and on to the NATO Defence Alliance summit in Madrid, and part of the formulation of the language of those events is that they are gatherings of heads of state and government, and that matters because, of course, in the UK system we have a head of government in Liz Truss, the Prime Minister. We have a head of state in Her Majesty the Queen, and that distinction between the two so pivotal to how the UK system operates.
Chris, thank you again. Chris Mason, our political editor there, with the latest for us in Downing Street. Well, from Downing Street, let's go to Windsor, because Windsor, of course, dominated by the great castle, and Windsor, I think it's fair to say, as our understanding goes, is the Queen's favourite residence, though she loves Balmoral as well. But at Windsor, our correspondent Elena Wilkinson has been there for us today. Looks slightly better weather-wise than it was earlier, Helena. What is your sense there of the way that the local community in Windsor, which has such a close bond with the royal family because of the proximity there, what's your sense of what people are saying in Windsor itself?
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And for those who don't know, Windsor Castle is right in the centre of Windsor. Just down the road is the high street full of shops, and local people, residents in Windsor, very much view the Queen as one of their neighbours, as a local resident. In previous years, she was often seen in the Great Park around here. We've spoken to a number of people here on the high street, some emotional at the news of the Queen's health, and also many people just anxious to hear how she is. We haven't had another update from the palace since the one we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. Lots of visitors coming out of the castle gates here. Some of them told us that they had heard the news from inside the grounds, others emerging not having heard. We know, of course, that the Queen spent much of the last 2.5 years here at the castle. As you mentioned, Hugh, this is perhaps her most favourite royal residence. It's a lot of green space around here. It's somewhere where she loves to be, and she spent the last years of her husband's life, the Duke of Edinburgh, during lockdown. They remained here together, spending day after day together. They celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November 2020. She of course made that trip, which is traditional for the Queen, to spend the summer months at Balmoral. She left here Windsor Castle in July, and the Queen would traditionally return here to the castle in October. But the sense this evening, Hugh, here, the feeling amongst locals and also visitors here, tourists here, there are some who've gathered just a bit down from where we are, is one of concern, deep concern about the Queen, wanting to know how she is, and anxiety. So I think everyone really is waiting for another statement from the palace to find out exactly how Her Majesty is.
Well, we await to see if that statement comes, Helena. Thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there with the latest at Windsor. And of course, Windsor is where the Queen spent so much of the lockdown period, much of that with the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in July this year, the Queen decided that she really did want to maintain the tradition of spending lots of the summer at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, in the glorious countryside there. And of course, Balmoral Castle is one of the favourite homes of the Queen, where she's spent so many happy times during her long life, going back to her childhood, and it brings back lots of memories of happy times with her parents and her sister Margaret, and of course with her family when they were young, and then growing up with Prince Philip as well, as they enjoyed the countryside and the picnics and the barbecues around Balmoral. So it's a place of great happiness for the Queen, and that's the reason she decided that she really did, despite her mobility problems and health issues, she wanted to leave Windsor in July and go to Balmoral as usual. And she is, of course, a stickler for tradition. So Buckingham Palace there on the right, very much seen as the office, if you like. That's where the working quarters are. Windsor, not too far away to the west, is really the kind of favourite home, the main home, where lots of work is also done. And then, of course, we have the other residences, Balmoral, which we are familiar with in summer. And then, of course, Sandringham in the east of England. And there are a few others too. Of course, there's Holyrood House in Edinburgh. So we are looking today at news from Balmoral. That's our focus today. It's not Buckingham Palace, really. It's Balmoral, and that is where the Queen is being kept comfortable by the team of doctors who are there and who have just put that unusual statement out earlier today. Unusual because it was rather forthcoming, saying that they were concerned. They were now concerned about the state of the Queen's health, and that she was comfortable at Balmoral, that some of the family now who've arrived there to see their mother, in the case of Prince Charles and Princess Anne, and Andrew and Edward, and then, of course, a grandson in the form of Duke of Cambridge. They're all there, and we imagine that they've been talking to the doctors there and have had their briefing, and one imagines that they are with the Queen, keeping her company and making sure that she's as comfortable as possible. Now, at Balmoral is my colleague James Cook, who's the BBC's Scotland editor. And James, could you bring us up to date, please, on what's been going on there?
Yes, Hugh, no sense of drama here, no sense of panic, a sense instead of a well-rehearsed plan quietly swinging into action. For most of the afternoon, it was relatively calm here. The rain teemed down, leaving the purple heather around this estate sodden. Every few minutes or so, another photographer, another reporter would cross Isambard Kingdom Brunel's bridge across the River Dee and make their way here to the gates of Balmoral. And then at 5:05, a flurry of flashbulbs as senior members of the royal family swept past us. Prince William driving a Range Rover, Prince Andrew next to him, and in the back Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I could see grim faces. Certainly Andrew, I saw clearly, very grim-faced Andrew as they drove past and into this estate, which of course has been one of the favourite places, if not the favourite place of the Queen for many, many decades of her reign. An estate, a 50,000 acre estate dating
back in terms of its association with the royal family to Queen Victoria, the castle here built for her in the 1850s. And of course a place where we know the Queen has many fond memories of spending time with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, not least because the photograph that was released by the family on his death was a photograph of the two of them together in the hills on this estate.
James, just a thought here about the Queen's relationship with Scotland as well, because of course we're at a time where there's been a lot of debate about the future shape of the United Kingdom. The Queen, of course, represents the solid element of continuity, and that's an interesting thing for us to reflect on, given her great affection for Balmoral and indeed for Scotland.
Yes, this is surely a monarch who personifies the union of the crowns of 1603 as much as she does anything else. The constancy that we talk about that applies to her reign actually goes way back before her reign in terms of the royal family's relationship with Scotland, predating the Act of Union, the Union of the Parliaments in 1707. And indeed the Queen has been a constant figure associated with that union of the crowns. Not, it has to be said, Hugh, always without controversy. In the Silver Jubilee speech, which the Queen gave in 1977 at Westminster, when she talked about the benefits union had conferred at a time when the Labour Party was proposing to devolve power to Wales and to Scotland, proposals that were ultimately defeated. That certainly raised eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised in 2014 when the Queen, attending Crathie Kirk, just along from the gates of Balmoral here, talked about people considering the future, thinking very carefully about the future as they decided how to vote in the referendum on independence, which the people of Scotland ultimately rejected. The palace, of course, strongly denied that there was anything wrong with that comment, said it was a perfectly sensible thing to say, to urge people to think very carefully about such a serious issue. And of course there is deep affection for the Queen in parts of Scotland. It is fair to say that if you look at the polling, the monarchy is not as popular north of the border as it is south of the border, but the Queen is certainly more popular than the monarchy in Scotland, and that is certainly reciprocated on her behalf. She's talked of her deep and abiding affection for this nation.
And a thought, James, as well about the place that Balmoral plays in the great royal landscape, if you like. You've mentioned the fact, and we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Queen has a great affection for it, and its heritage goes back to Queen Victoria's time. We're talking about Aberdeenshire, which of course is lots of it, very, very beautiful. The landscape there is magnificent. And as you say, very significant that rather lovely image of the Queen and the Duke, released when the Duke died, was indeed in the hills above Balmoral, on this enormous estate that the Queen has there.
Yes, that's right, and the Queen has been coming here regularly with her family for the summer and into the early autumn, year after year after year. It's very clear that this place is somewhere for which she holds extremely deep affection. We just see another police car going through the gates there of Balmoral Estate. Yes, Hugh, you're right. I mean, there is definitely an affinity. I mean, if you look back through the newsreel footage, back through the years, here she was in the 1960s, buying an ice cream for one of the young princes just along the road in one of the local shops. One of the few places really where, I'm not saying the Queen routinely walks up and down the streets of Ballater and Braemar, but it would be a place where she would not be troubled by people locally if she were to do so, because people are very used to seeing senior members of the royal family. Indeed, I remember one occasion somebody telling me that just outside these gates here, they were driving along and there was a car waiting with its indicator on to turn into the gates, and as they drove past they realised it was none other than Queen Elizabeth at the wheel.
Well, James, thank you very much. James Cook with some nice memories there of the Queen and life in Balmoral. But today we are reflecting on the state of the Queen's health, sadly, and we're just waiting to see whether Buckingham Palace or the officials at Balmoral make another statement, having said at lunchtime that the Queen's doctors are very concerned about the state of the Queen's health, that she is comfortable, that they had no more to say at that point, but they felt it necessary to convey the fear and the anxiety that was being felt. And that is why, of course, we've now seen the Duke of Cambridge, Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and some others making their way to Balmoral. They've arrived there. The Prince of Wales already there, and the Duchess of Cornwall too. The Princess Royal is there. So the family, the family is gathered, and we're told that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way, but he wasn't with the party that arrived a short while ago. Watching the images with me, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, and Nick James there was underlining the special place that Balmoral holds, because really some people may be wondering why the Queen in September is in Balmoral. Why is she not back in Windsor or even in Buckingham Palace? But it's important to underline that that's normal. That's what she does.
And she, of course, she loves to have the routine, to have the sense of confidence that you get from an unchanging routine. And so much of her year never changes. So yes, I think the annual trip up to Balmoral is really very important to her, and it is somewhere where she feels very comfortable, very much at ease, somewhere that she has known all her life. So the time is approaching 6:30 now, isn't it? I was struck by what James Cook was saying about the grim faces that he noticed on the faces of the members of the royal family as they drove into Balmoral Castle a short time ago. We are still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern, and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
There is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace, and the area in front of it dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern, but at this stage we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and of course that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that indeed they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians.
Return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes.
But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern, but at this stage we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and of course that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that indeed they are unable to help Her Majesty. Anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952, on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child, was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister. The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death
They were greeted by the Earl of Athlone, who afterwards presented the awards. The standard of horsemanship among the competitors was as high as ever. Meeting with His Majesty is happily able to relax in the quiet surroundings of domestic life.
Ladies and gentlemen, I should like first to thank you all very much for the kind welcome you have given me today as your new president.
Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, the young parents whose infant son links the past and the future of our land. And following were the heavily veiled, grieving figures of the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret.
Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folk.
What I say to you now, as your queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The death of Her Majesty brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 8 decades of immense change. Throughout that time, Her Majesty was the one constant presence in public life, a head of state who personified stability and reassurance. Her life had been dedicated to the service of the people, and her reign was characterized by a steadfast sense of duty. Elizabeth was just 25 when she came to the throne in 1952 on the sudden death of her father, King George VI, as Britain was still recovering from the Second World War. She was sustained by her 73-year marriage to the late Prince Philip. Her strength and stay, as she once described him, was at her side for 3 major Jubilee celebrations. Elizabeth II was the most widely travelled head of state in history, the Queen of 15 nations, head of the Commonwealth of 54 countries and territories. Her Majesty's death brings the second Elizabethan age to a close, and a long and momentous chapter in British life, a reign marked above all else by a sense of service to others, a reign unlike any other in the long history of Britain and the Commonwealth. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is with me as we report the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And one thinks immediately, Nick, first of all, of the loss for the royal family.
One does. This, for the nation, for them, this is an absolutely massive moment. The moment that so many people have dreaded for so long has come. It's a moment of great solemnity and national sadness. It's hard, really, fully to take it in. It's no great surprise, given her age and her declining health. But nonetheless, it is a very considerable shock to feel that she has died. Millions of people, I think, as they learn this news, will feel a sense of personal loss. And I think many people will find it rather disorientating. Let's just understand this moment. It isn't just the death of the longest lived, longest reigning monarch in British history, a monarch who has been there in the background to our lives for most of us, for all of our lives. It is the end of what I think history will judge to have been one of the most remarkable reigns in the 1,000-plus years of the British monarchy, a reign which will be remembered and talked about in years to come. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and we know, as we've said this afternoon, that not everyone is, she was a monarch who earned the widest possible respect here in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It's the end of the reign of Elizabeth II, a monarch who always put duty first, who brought dignity and decency to the highest office in the land, who embodied the best of qualities, who's been a focus for national unity and identity, and who has been the still, calm centre of stability and reassurance to this nation and the other nations of which she has been head of state for more than 70 years, while so much around her has changed. She has been a distillation of our national identity. She has been constant in an ever-shifting world, constant, steadfast, dependable, dutiful. These are all rather old-fashioned words, old-fashioned concepts even, but I think that they sum up what she brought to the role of monarch. We recall the pledge she made on her 21st birthday. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Well, she truly remained true to that pledge. It was a life of finely judged service, true to the principles of constitutional monarchy, driven by duty, sustained by faith. And we recall also the message that she issued when she reached her 70th birthday in February of this year. You remember the message that was issued? She wrote, "I remain eternally grateful for and humbled by the loyalty and affection that you continue to give me." She said, "I look forward to continuing to serve you with all of my heart." And she signed that message, "Your servant, Elizabeth R." Well, that servant has gone. The end of the reign of Elizabeth II, Elizabeth the Great, as many people will regard her, that reign has ended. And we have a new king.
Yes.
The crown passes invisibly, but immediately, imperceptibly. Charles is now our king and our head of state. Camilla is now queen consort. It remains to be seen what name he will take, but we will refer to him as the king, and he will lead the nation's mourning for his mother. As you say, she came to the throne just a few years after the end of the Second World War. She succeeded to the throne in 1952 after the death of her father. And on the night of her coronation, in a broadcast on the BBC, she said, "Throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your service." And as that message, and as the message she issued on the 70th anniversary of her accession showed, if there is one word that I think is the key to the success of her reign, I would suggest it's not actually duty, the word which is normally associated with her, it's humility. Because for all of the grandness of her position, here is the coronation, the imperial state crown being lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. For all the grandness of her position, it never went to her head. She had, I think, an instinctive understanding that as a hereditary monarch, she had to win the trust of the people of this country and the other countries of which she was queen. And that, I believe, is what she did. She gained it and she kept it. She kept the monarchy strong. Now, of course, there have been a few bumps along the way. It would be extraordinary if there hadn't been. Bumps which have almost without exception been caused by other members of her family. But she pursued her role with that sense of humility and by putting duty first. And she was at heart, people who knew her, it's funny to talk in the past tense now, isn't it? She was a very down-to-earth, a straightforward and unpretentious woman, rather reserved, certainly in her early years. There was none of that sort of vainglorious and overbearing behaviour that we've sometimes perhaps seen with other members of her family. For 70 years she's been the constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives, the head of the nation, as she's sometimes been referred to, above politics, but with a shrewd interest in and a grasp of politics and of political figures. So we now look back on, and there will be so many tributes now, as people take this in, as they come to terms with their own emotions. And I'm quite sure there will be many people who are very emotional at this moment, as they learn of this news, the death of the Queen. But this nation and so many other nations will now pay tribute to this long life of service which has now ended.
Symbolised everywhere, Nick. The flags are being lowered, and the rainbow along with the lowered flag at Windsor, the favourite home of the Queen. So many years. Flags lowered already at Buckingham Palace. And so many elements, Nick, of your appreciation and tribute will be echoed by political leaders at Downing Street. We're expecting Liz Truss to say something fairly soon. The Prime Minister will offer her own sympathy to the royal family, and she will of course have her own words of appreciation for the long service of Her Majesty. And there'll be other political leaders too wanting to pay tribute to a lifetime of service, a lifetime of humble commitment to duty, as Nick was saying, and of taking the role as seriously as it's possible to take it. Very much in line with the teaching that her father had shared with her all those years ago in Buckingham Palace. King George VI, very proud of his 2 daughters, and took a long time to offer the experience and learning to his elder daughter Elizabeth. And there you have, at the railings of Buckingham Palace, they are, in line with tradition, posting the formal notice. And that notice will say that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died peacefully today at Balmoral in Scotland, the age of 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history. A lifetime of service to people in the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and in many parts of the world. An example of leadership which didn't stray into the realm of politics, and for lots of people the ideal symbol of what a constitutional monarchy should be like. Well, now the world has been told, and the official notice has been posted as the palace staff make their way back into what was the Queen's home. It is now the home of the King and the Queen Consort, because Prince Charles is now King Charles. It remains to be seen whether he will call himself Charles as king, but we are assuming that he will. And this now is the home of the new monarch, the King, and his consort, the Queen Consort. Crowds still gathering at Buckingham Palace because the news has travelled very rapidly here and at Windsor and at all the other royal residences. But of course people will be following these events closely on their televisions and their mobile devices and all kinds of different means of spreading the news and social media as people come to terms with what's happened. And as Nick was saying memorably a few moments ago, it's a seismic event. It's the longest reigning monarch in British history who's left us at the age of 96, and it's not a surprise when someone of that age suffers ill health and eventually passes away. But what is left, of course, is the reflection on what was achieved and the kind of life that was led, and the sense of duty and the sense of loyalty, and, as Nick was saying, the sense of humility, which seems rather bizarre to say for a monarch, but someone who had a sense of service to others. And this was a theme that was repeated so often in the Queen's statements at great milestones in her life, and those 4 great jubilees, where she underlined the notion of service, to be at the service of the people, and to appreciate the fact that people were loyal to her as a monarch, and appreciated the fact that she was of, well, incalculable value in terms of her service to Britain, having come to the throne at such a young age and with very little experience. At the age of 25, when she didn't expect to be in that position at all, her father suddenly dying in his 50s. A terrible blow, and then a huge burden for the young Queen to be bearing. But she did so, and with a strong sense of what the monarchy was meant to be, the sense that her father had shared with her. And as we said earlier, for those considering the nature of the reign, the longest reign in British history, it was in many senses a continuation of the reign of George VI. The crowds at the palace will have seen this formal announcement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral tonight and will be returning to London tomorrow. And that is the formal announcement to the world in the traditional way, the printed statement being fixed to the railings of Buckingham Palace. And that, when we see that, Nick, that is the chapter completed.
And the vehicles there outside Buckingham Palace are stopping. The word will be reaching people. People will be very shocked, I think, by this. I think it is very hard to take it in. But there is, as you say, the news. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, so presumably she must have died before the members of her family arrived at Balmoral, but they will have known, as they drove in through the gates, they will have known that the Queen, their mother, or their grandmother, had died. It doesn't make any reference as to whether the King was at her bedside, but we do know that Charles and Camilla had travelled across to Balmoral Castle, so one presumes that they will have been there at the end. And the Princess Royal as well, one must assume, though they have not said that. And of course there will be many arrangements, but before the arrangements there will be all the tributes. And those will be on a scale that we have really not seen before.
No. They've started, Nick, already, as you can imagine. President Biden, the White House, he and his wife saying our hearts and thoughts go to the Queen's family and the British people, of course, coming from our strongest ally. So you'd expect the statement to be warm and sincere, as it is. But as you say, Nick, it'll be just the start of countless tributes from world leaders, religious leaders, and of course, I think it's right to say this, from millions of people, from ordinary people who will want to be sharing their sense of loss.
Yes, yes, and that sense of loss will be deep and it will be widespread. As we've both been saying, people will feel a personal loss, that a person who they in some way knew or felt they knew has gone, who was always there, who was this reassuring presence, this embodiment of stability and continuity, and who personified the unity of the United Kingdom. It is, as I think you used the word, it is a seismic event in terms of the United Kingdom, and of course it, I think, will rather add to that sense of flux that we have at the moment.
Yes.
Of political change with a new Prime Minister, of economic crisis with all the energy costs, gosh, who's giving a thought to that huge statement that the new Prime Minister made in the House of Commons today about that. There is war in Europe. Well, the monarchy, in one of those hard to put your finger on ways, is a stabilising and unifying force, and that will be the challenge now for Charles as king, and he, I'm sure, will want to act quickly. He will lead the mourning for his mother, for the Queen, but he will, I'm sure, also want to just indicate that he understands what is required as a constitutional monarch. He has already indicated that he does completely understand that it is a different role, that he will have to give up his interventions, but I think that he will reign in a slightly different way. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but each monarch brings something of their own personality to the role, and I think that Charles will try to continue his interest in some of those issues without in any way allowing politics or a political scope to come into it.
I'm told, Nick, that we are expecting a statement from the new king fairly shortly. So when we have that, we'll bring it right away. And as we look at these rather nice images of Her Majesty, of course, engaged in one of the endless official engagements that she's done over the years, it's worth bringing in as well some remarks from the Dutch royal family, because the British royal family and the Dutch royal family have enjoyed close relations over the years. The Dutch royal family saying, "We remember Queen Elizabeth II with deep respect and with great affection. Steadfast and wise, she dedicated her long life to serving the British people. We feel a strong bond." This is the King of the Netherlands. "We feel a strong bond with the United Kingdom and his royal family, and we share their sorrow at this time. And we're very grateful for our country's close friendship, to which Queen Elizabeth made such an unforgettable contribution. King Willem Alexander and Queen Maxima." and Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands offering their tributes. Just worth underlining the scale and the importance and the impact of what we are reporting today. It is a huge milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. The fact that the Queen, who was crowned back in 1953, has died peacefully at Balmoral in Scotland this afternoon. The King, that is King Charles, and the Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral this evening, and then we will be expecting them to return to London tomorrow. And that's a statement also expected from the new King sometime in the next maybe 20 minutes or so. But these images remind us of those happy days which really do just set the foundations really for a hugely successful and productive reign. Coronation Day back in 1953, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, just on the right hand side there, the Duke of Edinburgh just behind her. But the Queen, the young Queen, became Queen at the age of 25, acknowledging the huge crowd that had gathered on Coronation Day back in 1953, where we're looking at the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. And here we are in 2022 reporting on the Queen's death at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace formally making that announcement a short while ago, saying that the Queen, whose health was the matter of a bulletin earlier today, and doctors expressing their concern, Queen died peacefully at Balmoral during the course of this evening. We don't have a precise time, but we do know that several members of the royal family were at Balmoral, and they were no doubt in a meeting with the doctors and the experts when they got there. And indeed the news came fairly soon after their arrival that Her Majesty had indeed passed away at the age of 96. Earlier today they were saying that she was being kept comfortable in Balmoral. There was no sign of any move to hospital, no sign of any further intervention by doctors in a different kind of facility. All the care was being done at Balmoral itself. And indeed a few hours later came the very sad news, which will affect many millions of people, that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, having lost her husband, Prince Philip, back in 2021. And on the Queen's death, we now have a new king. Prince Charles will become King Charles, possibly, with a consort who will be the Queen Consort, known as Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become king. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. We are expecting a statement from the new King fairly shortly. We're also expecting a statement from the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who visited the Queen in Balmoral just a couple of days ago and was able to accept the invitation to form a government in that audience, where the Queen was seen to be smiling broadly and looked very focused on the task at hand, albeit looking rather frail. Well, that was 2 days ago, and yesterday came the news that she was unable to fulfil an appointment with the Privy Council. That's the senior ministers in the new government of Liz Truss. It was to be an online meeting, but nonetheless, the Queen was judged to be too tired and she needed to rest. She wasn't well, and her doctor suggested last evening that that meeting should not be held, and she was resting last night. And by this morning, indeed, late morning, the Queen's doctors were clearly very concerned and that the Queen's condition had deteriorated fairly rapidly. And then by lunchtime we had the statement that her health was causing particular concern. And then we saw the members of the family arriving at Balmoral. And shortly after that, within the past half hour or so, came the formal statement that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. We have statements from lots of world leaders. We'll come to them in a second. The President of the Irish Republic, for example, Michael D. Higgins. The Queen visited the Irish Republic back in 2011. She was the first British monarch to visit the Irish Republic. It was a hugely successful meeting. I've got a very warm welcome there. Her Majesty, says President Higgins, served the British people with exceptional dignity. Her personal commitment to her role and extraordinary sense of duty were the hallmarks of her period as Queen, which will hold a unique place in British history. There aren't many who will disagree with that. That's President Michael Higgins of the Republic of Ireland. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has just issued this statement, which of course will be welcomed by Charles as the new king as well. He says, "May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace and rise in glory." Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. As she had done before, she reminded us of a deep truth about ourselves, says the Archbishop. We are a people of hope who care for one another. A very warm tribute and a sincere tribute from the Archbishop himself. I think we can bring a little more from the Archbishop, and it's a very eloquent tribute, as you'd imagine, from Justin Welby. "It's with profound sadness," says the Archbishop, "that I join the nation, the Commonwealth and the world in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen. My prayers are with the King and with the royal family. May God draw near them and comfort them in the days and weeks and months ahead." The Archbishop goes on, "As we grieve together, we know that in losing our beloved Queen, we have lost the person whose steadfast loyalty, service and humility has helped us make sense of who we are through decades of extraordinary change in our world, our nation and society. And as deep as our grief runs, even deeper is our gratitude for Her late Majesty's extraordinary dedication to the United Kingdom, her realms and the Commonwealth. Through times of war and hardship," says the Archbishop, "through seasons of upheaval and change, and through moments of joy and celebration, we have sustained by Her late Majesty's faith in what and who we are called to be." The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, with that moving statement. We also have a statement from the King, from Charles, who became king on the death of his mother. And Charles says this: "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." The tribute there by the new king, by Charles, who became king immediately on his mother's death. So the tone, as one would expect, is loving, it's warm, it's respectful, and it just underlines the affection in which the Queen was held. We are expecting the Prime Minister in just a moment, Nick, but that statement was moving, wasn't it?
It was, yes. My beloved mother, a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all the members of my family. Interesting that it's not signed as King Charles. There's no name on it. It has been suggested that he might take another name as king, but I suspect it'll be tomorrow before we learn that. But yes, it's quite hard to sum up the profound nature of this moment, isn't it, really? They have lost their mother or their grandmother. They must grieve privately, but Charles must now begin to assert himself and begin his reign. I'm sure he will travel around the country. He will, I mean, this is challenging. It would be challenging for anybody, and we're about clearly to hear now from the Prime Minister.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was installed at Downing Street just a couple of days ago, having met the Queen in that audience, really presenting her own tribute with some personal elements in that, but also revealing something which we were hoping to hear either from the Prime Minister or from the palace, which is that Charles will be known as King Charles III, Nick, and that is at least confirming the title that he has adopted.
Yep, that answers that question. And of course, for him, for Charles, there will be conflicting emotions at this moment. Yeah. There is the great sadness that he refers to in his statement of the loss of his mother. But at the same time, this is the moment when he finally achieves his destiny. He is the oldest and longest serving heir apparent in British history. He will be the oldest person to become king in British history. Previously, the oldest person was William IV, who became king in 1830, aged 64. Well, Charles is 73. And he will know that this is a challenge for anybody to step into the position so successfully occupied for so many years by Elizabeth II. And he has had a long time to think about this. He's never spoken about it publicly because that really would not be appropriate. The only clue he has given is that he fully understands that the role of monarch is different to that of Prince of Wales. So he has assured people that he will not meddle, which is the one great concern that people have had about him. It was the one area in which, one area among many, that the Queen, Elizabeth, was so successful. She understood the limits, what a monarch needed to do, how far a monarch could go. And Charles, one can be confident, also must understand that. So he will reign in his own way, but within the constraints of the constitutional monarchy. So he understands that, though he may, I think, attempt to be a little bit more proactive than the Queen has been throughout, or the Queen was throughout her reign. He, I think, will attempt to use the convening powers. But that, again, that is really all for the future. He will, I think, travel around the country. He will want to establish himself, want to lead the nation's mourning for his mother, now that the reign, the long reign of Elizabeth II has ended.
I just want to share again the statement made by the new king. This is the statement by King Charles III, and he says, the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. And Charles goes on, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country and the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. And during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. Statement by the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, because the Prime Minister has confirmed that the Queen, now having died at the age of 96, has been succeeded by Charles and will be known as King Charles III and the Queen Consort, of course, Camilla. Let's go to Downing Street then, where the Prime Minister Liz Truss has just delivered her tribute, and join Chris Mason, our political editor. The Prime Minister certainly wanted to pay tribute to the Queen's long record of service, Chris, but also wanted to, I suppose, introduce a little bit of a personal element, in the sense that she said that the Queen for her had been very much someone who'd inspired her over the years.
Yes, that's right, Hugh, and a Prime Minister just 48 hours in office, tasked with finding the words for such a profound moment in our country's history. Just picking out a few of the sentences that struck me in the statement from Liz Truss just a few moments ago. The rock on which modern Britain was built, she reflected about Her Majesty the Queen. Britain is a great country today because of her, and because of her stability and strength, that she encapsulated and personified, the Prime Minister said, the spirit of Great Britain. As you just mentioned in conversation with Nick, the news from the Prime Minister that the King will be known as His Majesty King Charles III. And then the profound solemnity and gravity of those final words from Liz Truss, God save the King.
When we look at the change that's now happening, Chris, because clearly there are big implications for Downing Street and government, given the very strong axis that exists between the office of the monarch and the executive and parliament in this constitutional monarchy that we have. What will be happening, do you think, now in terms of the administration in Downing Street? What are the things that they will need to come to terms with, given that we now have a new monarch?
It'll be a profound change, a significant change at a time politically of considerable flux. It is, of course, a new team that have moved into Downing Street, not just the Prime Minister, but so many of her senior advisors in the last 48 hours or so, themselves trying to work out how the very heart of British government and the British state on the political side operates. Now, within that and beyond that, in the broader governmental machine, are procedures and protocols in terms of the conversations that take place between Downing Street as an institution and Buckingham Palace, the monarchy, as an institution. But nonetheless, obviously, it's such a profound historical moment. Things will change. A Prime Minister who had just had a single audience with the Queen, that first audience also being her last one. And in future, of course, those audiences, they are gatherings that take place once a week, where the Prime Minister heads to see the monarch and has a period of time privately in their company, knowing in the political world it being the one opportunity where you can talk very candidly to someone without the prospect of it being leaked, that in the future for the Prime Minister will be very different from the one that she might have anticipated, from the one that so many of her predecessors, 14 of her predecessors, have enjoyed, that conversation that they had with the Queen, more recently taking place remotely, traditionally taking place physically at Buckingham Palace, where Prime Minister after Prime Minister, 15 in total including Liz Truss, were able to spend that time with the Queen and tap into a well of knowledge and savvy and wisdom about world affairs that was unprecedented. A stateswoman of a longevity greater than any other on earth, and with that, Prime Ministers would so often reflect.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Outside the palace, 100,000 people surged forward in a solid mass. They wanted Elizabeth. They wanted Philip.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
I've just been talking to your Secretary of State for Health.
Thank you so much for this.
It's one small step for man,
what I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. With the benefit of historical hindsight, we can all see things which we would wish had been done differently, or not at all.
In interviews and in their memoirs, just how valuable a relationship that was. Firstly, as I say, because it was grounded in that sense of solemnity and privacy, but secondly, because of the wisdom and experience that the Queen was able to bring.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason, our political editor. And as you can imagine, lots of political leaders are wanting to pay their own tributes. From Scotland, and of course, let's just underline the fact that the Queen passed away at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire. So the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has been sharing her response to what's happened today in the Queen's death. She said it was a profoundly sad moment for the UK, the Commonwealth and the world. And then the First Minister goes on to say, the Queen's life was one of extraordinary dedication and service. And she said, on behalf of the people of Scotland, I convey my deepest condolences to the King and to the royal family. First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, with the statement that she issued just a few moments ago. The time is 7:20, and you're watching this extended coverage from BBC News on this very, very sad day, because we are reporting the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life over a span of 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become King Charles III. Now, within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released the formal statement. It said this: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That is the brief statement stating the events of the past hour or so and the fact of the Queen's death at the age of 96 after the longest reign in the history of the United Kingdom. And Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is with us. By now, Nick, of course, this news will be around the world. And that is why we are seeing, of course, responses from countries as far afield as Japan and the United States, and of course European countries, the European Union. Those tributes will come in. But for the people of the UK, we mentioned earlier that of course we were thinking about the impact on the royal family. Let's dwell then on the impact on the people of the United Kingdom, for whom the Queen has been this symbol, not just of authority, but a symbol of real solidity and of consistency over the years. Taking that symbol away, albeit with a new monarch, King Charles III, who's a very familiar figure, but taking that symbol away will have an effect on people's lives, even those who are not dedicated monarchists.
It is a huge loss, and I think many people will find it disorientating, the feeling that this person who has been such a constant presence in the background of their lives, that this person is no longer there. It is hard, really, to take it in, to speak of her in the past tense, to fully appreciate that this reign, this longest reign in British history, is finally over. I mean, so many people over the years have said, we wish she could reign forever, we wish she could go on forever. Well, clearly not possible, but that reign ended this afternoon. At Balmoral, we now have both a new head of state and a new head of government in the Prime Minister. Who could have imagined that within the space of 48 hours? We will now await details of course, a state funeral, which will take place probably in about 10 days' time. That'll be the first full state funeral in the United Kingdom since that of Winston Churchill back in 1965. And Britain will mourn, and many people around the world will mourn also the passing of Elizabeth II. That presence who was there, the constant and reassuring presence, whilst so much around her changed. Every aspect of life, not just in this nation, but in every other nation around the world, has altered, but she was the one constant, dependable factor in so many of our lives, always there. If you think about the way in which culturally this nation has changed, it was monocultural when she came to the throne, multicultural now. It was very much empire-orientated, the United Kingdom in 1952 when she succeeded to the throne. There is the Commonwealth. The United Kingdom has, as it were, dallied with Europe and has sort of moved away from it. When she came to the throne, a majority of people believed that she was chosen by God. Yeah. There was still, of course, a much greater sense of deference. We're seeing some images here from the earlier stages of her life. She was, there she is, presenting the World Cup to Bobby Moore in 1966, and of course meeting so many American presidents there with the first George Bush, and pursuing her great passion of horse racing. In just so many facets of national life, the Queen was there, this dutiful figure, driven by faith, propelled by duty, with this sense of humility that we were talking about earlier. She was down to earth and straightforward, and as I said, she never let it go to her head. She realized that she was there by an accident of birth, and that she needed to win the trust and respect of her people, and that perhaps is something that not every member of her family has fully appreciated. Well, she did, in the same way that her father did, and in the same way I think that Charles has also appreciated that, because he has worked so hard. Prince Charles, you know, been a few controversies and difficulties for him, but he has set out during his time as Prince of Wales to win the respect of people and to show that he is worthy of the office and the position to which he has now succeeded. There he is with his mother. He is now mourning the loss of that mother and the loss of the Queen as he becomes king. Now we must assume that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has not, as it were, jumped the gun in naming him as King Charles III. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but we must assume that that is correct.
Just as you speak, Nick, your timing is impeccable. Clarence House has literally, in the last couple of seconds, confirmed that it is King Charles III. So well done on prompting that.
Very good.
Very good. So it is King Charles III, that's official. And I'm just going to interrupt a second, Nick, if I may, because Boris Johnson, who of course was Prime Minister until just a few days ago, has issued this statement. It's fairly lengthy, but I'm going to just read through it because well, you'll understand why. This is our country's saddest day, says Boris Johnson. In the hearts of every one of us, there is an ache at the passing of our Queen, a deep and personal sense of loss, far more intense perhaps than we expected. In these first grim moments since the news, I know that millions and millions of people have been pausing whatever they've been doing to think about Queen Elizabeth and about the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. These are the words of Boris Johnson. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. And Mr. Johnson says, wave after wave of grief is rolling across the world, from Balmoral, where our thoughts are with all the royal family, and breaking far beyond this country and throughout the great Commonwealth of Nations that she so cherished, and which cherished her in return. As is so natural with human beings, it is only when we face the reality of our loss that we truly understand what has gone. And it is only really now that we grasp how much she meant for us, how much she did for us, how much she loved us. Boris Johnson continues, as we think of the void that she leaves, we understand the vital role that she played, selflessly and calmly embodying the continuity and unity of our country. We think of her deep vision, her wisdom, her historic understanding, her seemingly inexhaustible but understated sense of duty. Relentless though her diary must have felt, she never once let it show. And to tens of thousands of events, great and small, she brought her smile and her warmth and her gentle humour. For an unrivalled 70 years, she spread that magic throughout her kingdom. And then Boris Johnson ends his tribute like this. This is our country's saddest day because she had a unique and simple power to make us happy. And that is why we loved her. That is why we grieve for Elizabeth the Great, the longest serving and in many ways the finest monarch in our history. It was one of her best achievements that she not only modernized the constitutional monarchy, but produced an heir to her throne who will amply do justice to her legacy and whose own sense of duty is in the best traditions of his mother and his country. Though our voices may still be choked with sadness, we can say with confidence the words not heard in this country for more than 7 decades. God save the King. The words of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister until a couple of days ago, and I'm bound to ask Nicholas Witchell, who's with me, that is quite a contrast to the tribute, the neat and elegant and sincere tribute that the Prime Minister paid, but that is of a different order, isn't it?
There is real feeling, isn't there? There is resonance in the words from Boris Johnson. He has clearly thought about that